But more than a century after the ship sank, new technology is shedding light on what happened on that fateful night.
For more than a century, the world has believed that the sinking of the Titanic was the result of human error. Blame has been placed on Captain Smith for maintaining speed. Blame has been placed on the Californian for failing to respond to distress signals. Blame has been placed on the White Star Line for not providing enough lifeboats. It has long seemed that the cause was understood. But we're wrong. In 2022, two robotic systems carried out the first complete scan of the wreck. The latest evidence, drawn from a full-scale three-dimensional reconstruction and long-overlooked meteorological records, is rewriting the entire tragedy.
Was so clear, and the thermal inversion meant that it was literally so clear that there was a haze caused by the clarity.
This is not a new theory. This is what the laws of physics reveal about what truly happened. A perfect night that hid everything. Across every official investigation into the Titanic, one detail has never been fully explained. The night of April 14, 1912 offered some of the clearest viewing conditions ever recorded in the North Atlantic. Atmospheric pressure reached 1,039 millibars, among the highest ever measured in the Northern Hemisphere. The sea was completely calm, without waves. The sky was so clear that sailors could read their watches by starlight. Visibility extended for miles in every direction. Experienced crew members on multiple vessels in the region recorded the same conditions in their logs. Under such circumstances, a properly trained lookout should have been able to detect an iceberg from a distance of up to 12 nautical miles. This is not speculation. It is a basic physical limit of nighttime visibility at sea under starlight and reflected illumination. The iceberg that struck the Titanic rose roughly 18 meters above the surface, with another 90 meters extending below. This was not a fragment of ice or a thin sheet. It was a massive, solid structure. Frederick Fleet, the lookout on duty that night, did not see the iceberg until the ship was only about 450 meters away. He immediately called the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch answered. Fleet reported, "Iceberg right ahead." From that moment to impact, 37 seconds remained. Both British and American investigations later attributed part of the blame to the absence of binoculars. Fleet himself testified that he might have seen the iceberg sooner if he had them. That explanation has been accepted for over a century. Yet it does not withstand basic reasoning. Binoculars do not create visibility. They enhance detail at distance. An object 18 meters high at 12 nautical miles should have been visible to the naked eye under clear conditions. This is why maritime practice relies first on direct observation, then on optical confirmation. If Fleet could not see the iceberg at all, even without magnification, the issue was not the lack of binoculars. There is another point. Estimates suggest that around 200 icebergs were present in the region that night. Fleet did not report seeing a single one. Not one, despite hours of continuous watch. Then, suddenly, one appeared with only 37 seconds remaining. Fleet also described detecting a distinct mineral scent, the smell of ancient ice slowly melting, for more than an hour before the collision. This indicates that he knew ice was nearby. He was actively searching, yet he saw nothing. This is not the account of a careless or distracted observer. It is the account of someone scanning an environment in which the visual conditions had been altered in a way he did not recognize. For more than a century, this has been explained through human factors such as fatigue, distraction, or overconfidence. But what if the optical environment itself was fundamentally different from anything Fleet had been trained to interpret? What if the problem was not the lookout at all? The damage no one expected. In 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard located the Titanic by following a trail of debris across the ocean floor that led to the hull. From that moment on, researchers studied the wreck in the only way available, through narrow viewing ports of submersibles, under limited light, one fragment at a time. This method imposed clear limitations. Naval analyst Park Stevenson, who advised on the film Titanic directed by James Cameron and later worked with scan data from Magellan, compared the process to investigating a crime scene through a keyhole. Theories multiplied because no one had ever seen the whole structure at once. In 2022, the seabed mapping company Magellan changed that. 2 remotely operated vehicles were deployed over 6 weeks, capturing more than 700,000 images from every possible angle. The result was a complete digital reconstruction of the wreck, down to individual rivets and seams. It became the most extensive underwater scanning project ever conducted. For the first time, researchers could examine the Titanic as a single object rather than a collection of disconnected fragments. The first major finding concerned the damage caused by the iceberg, and it directly contradicted the common image held for decades. Popular belief suggested that the iceberg tore a long gash along the hull, allowing water to flood in violently. The scan shows something very different. Instead of a single tear, there is a series of small punctures, each roughly the size of a sheet of paper, running along the starboard side like a line of needle holes in fabric. There is no dramatic rupture, no catastrophic tearing, just a precise sequence of openings that breached 5 watertight compartments rather than the 4 the ship was designed to withstand. Stevenson explains that the difference between 4 compartments and 5 amounts to about 3.6 meters of additional hull length, just over 10 feet. That narrow margin defined the boundary between survival and sinking. If the angle of impact had been slightly different, if Murdoch had turned even a few seconds earlier, the Titanic might have reached port for repairs and continued its journey. But the scan also revealed a second line of evidence, one that no earlier investigation could access because it did not lie within the wreck itself. It was hidden in the meteorological records of that night, and the person who uncovered it was not an engineer or a diver, but a meteorologist named Tim Moulton, who spent years studying details no one had thought to examine. The atmosphere was lying. To understand what Tim Moulton uncovered, it is necessary to begin with a basic principle of physics. Under normal conditions, air temperature decreases with altitude. The higher you go, the colder it becomes. This is the standard structure of the atmosphere. But under certain conditions, that pattern reverses. A layer of warm air settles above a layer of colder air near the surface. This phenomenon is known as a temperature inversion. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic was moving across the boundary between 2 very different water masses. The warm Gulf Stream was flowing northeast from tropical regions, while the cold Labrador Current was pushing south from the Arctic. Sea surface temperature that night was about -2 degrees Celsius. Yet at an altitude of around 60 meters, the height of the lookout position, the air was nearly 10 degrees warmer. A difference of 10 degrees across a vertical distance of 60 meters. Combined with atmospheric pressure of 1,039 millibars, among the highest ever recorded in the North Atlantic, these conditions created an exceptionally strong temperature inversion. And a temperature inversion bends light. Under normal conditions, light travels in straight lines, and the horizon appears at its true geometric position, roughly 12 nautical miles from the Titanic's lookout. But when light passes through layers of air with different densities, it refracts. It bends. Under a strong inversion such as that night, light curves along the surface of the Earth, traveling farther than it normally would. The result is a measurable optical phenomenon known as a superior mirage. This is not an abstract idea. It can be reproduced in laboratory conditions and has been recorded many times at sea. Its effect is precise. When light bends downward along the curvature of the Earth, the apparent horizon, the horizon that the human eye actually perceives, is lifted higher into the sky, above its true position. Between the real horizon and this raised horizon lies a compressed band of space, where light from multiple directions is mixed and scattered into a faint, low-contrast layer. Within that band, objects lose their edges. Their contrast fades. Their recognizable shapes dissolve. A trained lookout identifies ice by detecting the sharp, dark outline of a mass against the sea and sky. That method works under normal conditions, but on that night, the band created by the mirage erased those outlines entirely. A massive white iceberg was absorbed into that distorted layer of light and, from an optical standpoint, disappeared. Frederick Fleet did not see darkness. He saw something unusual in the light. He later described the horizon as strange, with a haze that should not have been there. Other captains in the region recorded similar observations in their logs, noting abnormal refraction, an unusual horizon, and a mist-like effect in otherwise clear air. These were experienced mariners describing a phenomenon they had never encountered and did not have the language to explain. Maltin compared sea temperature, air temperature, and pressure data from multiple ships operating in the same corridor that night. The figures aligned precisely with the conditions required to produce a strong superior mirage. This was not hindsight speculation. It was standard atmospheric physics applied to real data. The iceberg did not vanish because of darkness. It vanished because the atmosphere that night followed its own physical laws, and those laws removed it from view. Every decision made sense. The cold air mirage does more than explain why Frederick Fleet failed to see the iceberg. It restructures the behavior of everyone involved that night and reveals that each person was acting logically based on information that had already been distorted by physics. Consider Captain Stanley Lord of the Californian. The Californian was nearby, halted for the night by an impassable ice field. Captain Lord and his officers observed the lights of a ship in the distance. When the Titanic began firing distress rockets, they saw them, and they did not respond. For more than a century, this has been the most condemned decision in the entire Titanic story. The British inquiry effectively ended Lord's career, concluding that he had seen a ship in distress and failed to act. But the cold air mirage directly alters how distance is judged at sea. Observers estimate distance by referencing the horizon. A vessel whose hull disappears below the horizon is far away. A vessel that appears close to the horizon seems nearer. The raised false horizon created by the mirage made the Titanic appear to sit directly upon it, making it seem much closer than it truly was. The officers of the Californian estimated they were observing a ship about 120 meters long at a distance of roughly 8 kilometers. In reality, they were looking at a vessel 269 meters long at about 16 kilometers. The mirage simultaneously reduced the apparent size and shortened the perceived distance. The distress rockets, which should have burned brightly across the night sky, had to travel through 16 kilometers of distorted air rather than 8. By the time they were seen, they appeared weak, faint, and ambiguous. They could easily be interpreted as routine signaling. Morse lamp signals sent by Titanic could not be read through the refracted air. Captain Lord checked his charts. The only ship in the area equipped with wireless communication was the Titanic, the largest vessel in the world at 269 meters. The ship he was observing appeared much smaller and only a few miles away. Based on the information available to him, his conclusion was logical. The smaller vessel was experiencing a minor issue and was not the Titanic. According to British Board of Trade regulations, any unidentified rocket should be treated as a distress signal. Lord failed to follow that rule. Maltin's analysis does not excuse that failure, but it explains how a man could look directly at a disaster and perceive something that did not appear to be one. The same applies to Captain Smith. He had received 7 ice warnings on April 14th. His decision to maintain speed in an ice region has been judged as reckless. Yet the navigational principle he relied upon had a strong foundation. In clear conditions, ice can be detected at a distance and avoided. Smith had crossed the Atlantic more than 100 times and had used this method repeatedly. It worked in every normal optical environment. The night of April 14th was not a normal optical environment, but everything around Smith, the calm sea, the clear sky, the bright stars, signaled that conditions were normal. There was no visible indication that the atmosphere had changed. That is the defining nature of a superior mirage. It does not create fog or storms. It operates within apparent clarity. The conditions that made everyone feel safest were the very conditions that rendered them blind. What the engineers knew and chose anyway. The Magellan scan did more than document the damage along the outer hull. It captured evidence of what was happening inside the Titanic during its final 140 minutes. Evidence no survivor testimony could fully provide because those who understood the situation best did not survive. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell led the engineering team stationed in the boiler rooms and engine spaces deep within the ship. As water began flooding the forward compartments, they faced a decision that was not truly a choice: remain at their posts and keep power running, or abandon their stations and attempt to reach the upper decks. From their position inside a sinking vessel, no lifeboat could reach them in time. Staying meant certain death. Two of the Titanic's massive boilers, examined through scan data, show deformation consistent with active steam pressure at the moment the ship went down. A steam valve recovered from the wreck was found locked in an open position, clear physical evidence that steam was still being directed to the emergency generators until the very end. This explains what survivors described. The lights on the Titanic did not flicker. They did not gradually fade. They remained on, steady and bright, as the ship descended into the ocean. The engineers maintained power so that the crew could launch lifeboats under visible conditions, and so that Jack Phillips and Harold Bride could continue transmitting distress signals. Every minute of light meant more people could find their way across the decks in the darkness. Every member of the engineering team died that night. Their names appear on the list of the dead. Their decision to remain at their posts, knowing there was no escape, was never fully recorded in official investigations. Only in 2022 did the deformed boilers and the open steam valve provide the first physical record of that choice. The scan also sheds light on First Officer William Murdoch, the man who issued the turn order in the final 37 seconds, and who was later portrayed in various accounts, and even in the film by James Cameron, as having taken his own life in the final moments. Second Officer Charles Littler, who survived, consistently rejected that claim. He stated that Murdoch was swept away by the sea while attempting to launch the last lifeboat. The physical evidence supports Littler's account. Only one set of davits used to lower lifeboats was found in a retracted position within the debris field, matching the description of the final boat Murdoch was handling before he was carried away. The evidence lay undisturbed at a depth of 3,800 meters for more than a century, waiting to be read. Yet the most important evidence revealed by the scan is not about individuals. It is about margin. An additional 3.6 meters along the hull at the point of contact allowed water to breach 5 compartments instead of 4. 4 compartments, and the ship would remain afloat. 5 compartments, and the ship would sink in less than 3 hours. The entire disaster hinged on a section of hull shorter than the length of a car. If Murdoch had 3 more seconds, if the iceberg had struck at a slightly different angle, if Fleet had seen it 10 seconds earlier, any one of these small changes could have altered the outcome. And all of them were removed by an atmospheric phenomenon that no one on board knew was happening. The chain that could not break. Frederick Fleet lived for more than 50 years after that night. He testified before 2 separate inquiries. He answered questions about binoculars, about speed, about what he saw and what he did not see. The question that followed him for the rest of his life, why he did not see the iceberg sooner, remained unanswered by those who examined him. Not because they refused to answer, but because in 1912, no one had studied cold air mirages deeply enough to understand that they could remove an 18-meter iceberg from the view of a trained observer. Fleet died in 1965. The answer remained in the records, waiting. The data had always existed. Sea temperatures, air temperatures, atmospheric pressure, all carefully recorded in the logs of ships operating in the same corridor that night. Captains noted unusual refraction and continued their journeys. They lacked the framework to connect those observations into a complete mechanism. Maritime science at the beginning of the 20th century did not yet have the tools to interpret what they were seeing. Tim Moulton approached those records not to prove a theory, but to resolve a question that human error alone could not answer. Why did an experienced lookout fail to see a massive iceberg on a clear night? Binoculars could not explain it. Fatigue could not explain it. Carelessness could not explain it. Only the optical environment remained. When the environmental data is examined, the answer becomes clear and deeply unsettling. The conditions required to produce a superior mirage, a strong temperature inversion combined with high pressure and a sharp boundary between water masses of different temperatures, are not rare in the North Atlantic during spring. They occur regularly. The night of April 14, 1912 was an extreme case, but not an isolated one. What turned that night into a disaster was not only the strength of the phenomenon, but the convergence of multiple independent factors, each small and insignificant on its own, yet together forming an irreversible chain. Pressure at 1,039 millibars created a calm and clear night. The clarity created a sense of safety. The cold Labrador current produced the inversion. The inversion bent light. The bent light created a false horizon. The false horizon concealed the iceberg. The invisible iceberg reduced the warning time to 37 seconds. 37 seconds was not enough to avoid an object whose position was not fully perceived until it was already too late. Each step followed directly from the one before. None was random, and none, taken alone, appeared significant enough to alter human decisions. For more than a century, the story of the Titanic has been told as a lesson in human arrogance. A ship believed to be unsinkable that ultimately sank. The lesson is simple, compelling, and easy to communicate. It is also incomplete. Not because arrogance played no role, but because arrogance was not the mechanism that caused the deaths. The mechanism that took more than 1,500 lives that night was a chain of physical processes in the atmosphere, operating exactly as physics dictates, within a configuration that maritime science at the time had not yet documented. No human decision could have prevented those atmospheric conditions from forming. No binoculars, no change in speed, no communication system could restore visibility once the atmosphere had taken it away. Those who might have been saved, and there were many, were lost for other reasons. Too few lifeboats, inadequate drills, delayed communication, third-class passengers trapped below decks by the ship's class-based design. These are human choices, made within specific contexts with consequences that can be examined and judged. But the original question, why the iceberg was not seen, has an answer that does not belong to human decision-making. It belongs to the physics of light, moving through layers of air with uneven density. Frederick Fleet asked the right question. He simply did not know which part of the sky held the answer.